So Network, your station for all things geek.
Hey, music fans, welcome back to Modern Musicology. We are drummer and singer-songwriter Stephanie Seymour.
Hello, everybody.
DJ and journalist Rob Levy.
Sup?
And I am drummer and author R. Alan Seiler. And we have a great show lined up for you this week because we have a very, very special guest, a filmmaker that has been a friend of Stephanie's for a long time. And we are going to be joined also by one of the stars of that film, our very own Stephanie Seymour.
Oh, God.
Stephanie, why don't you take it away and introduce us to your friend?
Okay. Well, this is the fabulous Olivia Serafini-Sauli. She was raised in Florence, Italy, and New York City, which is totally cool. I love it. Olivia attended Georgetown University, where she was a college radio DJ at WGTB. She was a club DJ in New York City for 10 years and has worked in film and TV for over 25 years. She's produced and directed content internationally for television, commercial, and nonprofit organizations, including the Sundance Channel, AMC Networks, and the History Channel. Olivia founded Via 73 Films and has produced the short films Mary Bauer on the House, which had its world premiere at the Woodstock Film Festival, A to B, and the award-winning 500 Calories. Internationally, she's co-executive produced Suzanne and Marcello from Italy and Shooting Watermelons from the UK and Italy. Olivia is now making her directorial debut with the brand new feature documentary, Endless Calls for Fame, which is the story of our friends band, the New Rising Sons, who were super popular in the New York City indie rock music scene in the late 90s. It premiered last month at the Milwaukee Film Festival. Congratulations. That is just amazing. Please welcome my friend for over 30 years, Olivia.
Oh my God, that long. Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It is such a pleasure to have you joining us, Olivia.
Thank you.
And I told you this before we went live, but I just want to tell you that I absolutely loved this film. And I can't wait to talk to you about it.
Thank you so much.
Maybe you can first elaborate just a little bit on like the premise of the film, like maybe a little backstory about the band, the label deal, how the record didn't get released, and then how Kevin had the idea to get it re-released on Arctic on the 20th anniversary in 2019. And then like how you basically came up with the idea to make the movie.
Sure. There was this period of time in the, a good chunk of the 90s where there was a genre of music that we sort of all knew and lived by, punk rock, hardcore, indie rock, that was very underground that Nirvana helped kind of elevate to the mainstream. So what was happening at the time was a lot of bands were getting major label attention when they previously had really been relegated to underground, college radio, et cetera. And we all lived that with our friends, and everybody experienced it, including Stephanie as a musician, where all of a sudden there seemed to be this possibility that you could become huge and you could, get on a big label. And that was very new for the scene. And this group of our friends had experienced it in different bands they had been in previously, but all of a sudden they were kind of being coveted and they were being followed and by major labels. And the whole thing happened. It happened to many, many bands of that era. We can talk about that more later. But I, at the time, was just very good friends with everybody, and we were all part of the same community. And I just started to film everyone around me. I had this camera, which was at the time very modern, which was a high 8, which was smaller than those larger cameras. And it was really quite small for that era. And I started to I just would take it around everywhere and film everything that I saw, which a lot of the times was, live concerts, clubs, everything that was happening. And I did it completely because it's just sort of what I enjoy doing. I was in the film world, and it just kind of was really just for fun. And, we lived through this whole era with them. And then ultimately, like many bands, big shot of possible stardom. And then things started to fall apart. And the sort of, if the beginning of the story starts with the Nirvana explosion, I think the quote end of the story, or the point at which things started to get renegotiated, was the arrival of the internet and the arrival of MP3s and streaming, and the whole way in which music was made and sold was a major pivot in the industry, and it affected a lot of musicians. So that was sort of the bookend of it. And ultimately, I stayed friends with these guys, but we did kind of quiet, a little bit lose touch, not massively, but, we did as lives kind of go along. And in 2019, I get a message from Kevin McGinnis, who was the guitar player of this band, the New Rising Suns. And Kevin said to me that he had found the original reels of this album that they had recorded at the Bearsville Studios in upstate New York near Woodstock, very famous studio, that had been recorded for Virgin Records, that had never seen the light of day. It had gotten shelved, which happened to many bands. And he had found these original reels, and he was having them restored and remastered, and said to me, "Hey, do you have any photographs from that time? I would love to maybe use some pictures for the album art, because we're going to have it released finally." And so I went through my,
giant
albums,
collection,
right? Hard
yeah.
photo albums. Exactly. I had a lot of photographs. And then I basically started digging through my own archive, and I came across the same, like him, almost in a parallel way, a giant box of these hi-8 tapes. And I realized I had the whole story of what had happened to them existed in this analog medium. And so I called Kevin and I said, "Kevin, let's do something. Maybe I can do something for you. I have all this footage. Let me interview you," completely having no idea at all what it was going to become. And I think that is like the most exciting part of any creative journey, when you go in completely with very little expectations and you're sort of surprised. And so I started what ended up being, from 2019 to now, almost a 5-year journey of discovering the past and then their present and then their potential future, essentially. But that is how I ended up, recounting their story, which was also our story, because we lived it, really intimately. Stephanie, even more, because you were on the label side, I think, in many ways.
I was on the label side of their label. It was their label. And that, which I was going to get into later. But yeah, it was hard to be like the artist, seeing what was happening to your friends, as a musician, and then kind of being in a cog in the wheel of the big thing. But so did you not go into this with the idea of like, I'm making a feature film that I just want, because you've made shorts, but this was a whole new story?
Yeah, I started this project completely thinking it was going to maybe be a short that could be used in conjunction with the release of the album. I don't know, a small little nugget of a 5-10 minute thing that I could do for them.
Or maybe even a music video.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe I don't even, or like an EPK, like an old fashioned EPK, those electronic press kits they used to do. And so I went in really thinking it was short. I had gone to a short film workshop and had sort of talked about this idea at the workshop. And I really was thinking as a short little piece. I had absolutely no idea that it was going to be a feature. And what a fun surprise that was, I have to say.
How did it become a feature? How did it make that jump from a possible short project into a full-length film?
I think that journey of starting with something that you think is short and then it becomes a much longer thing is very organic. And I think what happened was as I started initially interviewing the guys, I found I had to find out what had happened and what the state of affairs was in the present day. And a lot had happened in the past. There's a lot of water under the bridge. There was a lot of history to cover. And the interviews were long and very meaty, and there was a lot to say and a lot of things that they had experienced. And that then started launching me into, well, there were so many other voices around them to tell this story.
Right.
And that's how I started then saying, Stephanie, can I talk to you? And I did. And then I started getting, and then I started to say, well, I have to talk to the A&R guy, and I have to talk to the engineer, and I have to find the producer. And it's a filmmaking instinct. When you're making a documentary, you have to find the different characters around it. So I started then going and interviewing all these different characters around them. Also keeping in mind that the process of them releasing the album became a very active thing. I was actively following a real-time experience. They were getting it mastered. They were getting it out to this label in Germany. I actually went to Germany. I really did what documentary filmmakers do in the best case scenarios, is just really follow their subjects and watch everything unfold. And it was an incredible thing to watch. It brought us all the way through to UC to where we are today. And it was clear to me pretty quickly that there was a lot of meat there. There was a lot to talk about. And it wasn't just about this band. It was about the industry. It was about what it's like to be what it had been like to be an artist in New York, how different it is now. There was just a lot. It started really showing itself to be a much more textured story, which was exciting.
So no pressure here, but can you compare and contrast the experience of making an independent feature film to maybe a band making a record?
Well, I think the parallel is it's a huge leap of faith. You kind of jump in and you really hope for the best. And you always, I think, it's going well when you're surprised by what you can do individually and then collectively. I think that that's something that really did happen when you collaborate with people and they surprise you and they push you to do things that maybe you couldn't do, which I think is the same when you're working with colleagues and friends in a studio and they say, well, why don't you try this or why don't you try that when you're trying out, different pieces of a song. So I think it is, and it has a certain kind of, there's an emotion there that's, that excitement and that fear, I think is very much, it lives in parallel.
Do you have the same issues though, you think, getting it out into the world? I mean, I know you did the Milwaukee Festival, for example, but how has it been to get the film sort of seen and out there? And I mean, obviously do things like this would generate a word of mouth and buzz and things, but it's almost like DIY now if you're an independent filmmaker, in the same way that putting out a 7-inch is. You just kind of have to just work and work and work if you're not in the framework of a studio or a label or a giant company.
I think that is so accurate, the way you said DIY. And I've said this from day one. I feel like the film is exactly the DIY way in which me and my friends and everybody lived in that era. I mean, punk is the most DIY thing in the world. Take your flyers, stick some things on, Xerox them at, the local pharmacy and put them all over your town. I think that that's very much the spirit of independent filmmaking now, because it's even more independent than it was in many ways. So the journey of getting the film out there has been really interesting. It's been such an education. I'm learning so much about it. It's been a really weird time because there's a lot of, without getting too much into the weeds, but there's a lot of changes that happen in this industry with streamers, with mergers and all these things. So finding the right place for a film has been really interesting. I've gotten some really constructive and really helpful advice from much smarter marketing brains who've helped me come up with a kind of strategy now going forward that is a combination of festival exposure, which is really helpful because you really do meet wonderful people. And I had that experience in Milwaukee. It was amazing. I cannot say greater things about that city and the people and the festival. And then on the international sort of distribution space as well, there's a lot of international interest in this kind of music. And so there's that piece of it. And then ultimately finding a kind of home for it within this new ethos. And I say new because it's new even as of yesterday. It changes every day. Figuring out what kind of platform could it live on, how will it reach its audience? And that has been in some way a harder journey because I have less information about that. I'm learning more. I can make stuff. I can do that, but I'm not a marketing person. So I'm learning a lot about that. And that's going to be, so it's interesting. So you're catching me very much at the beginning of it. I'm very much launching into that world. And, in an ideal scenario, an independent film like this one does a festival circuit, which, we have just started, and gets people to see it and in the festival universe. And then distributors who would be interested would then be able to elevate it to platforms that are more, broadly accessible.
I just want to say really quickly that even though we have twice now used DIY as a description for the process that you use to make this film, in no way does this film look DIY. I mean, this is a really well-produced film. And I feel like there are films that I've seen in theaters on streaming services from major companies, and with wide distribution that don't look as good. I mean, the sound design, the editing, the way the story is told, everything just works so well in this film.
That is so kind of you. Thank you so much. And I have to say, I was really fortunate because I've been in this industry for so long to be surrounded by such amazing talent. Incredible cinematographers,
yes,
incredible editor, the sound mixing and the sound design. I mean, they're all friends who are all talented artists and themselves who were really lending a hand to the project. So it did give it an incredible quality. One of my favorite things about it was the archival restoration work. I did share with you a piece of what the footage looked like prior to the restoration.
yes.
And it really shows you the technology now and what it can do to restore this very tape gets ruined very easily.
Yeah.
And so the work that our colorist did was incredible. In terms of production value, I was raised a certain way and I was educated a certain way in the film world. I'm really taught a certain way to shoot and to light. And I kind of, that's just ingrained in me in terms of things stylistically looking a certain way and looking a certain quality. I have very high standards, which sometimes can be a problem, but it's just kind of the way I grew up, or the way in my filmmaking space I was trained, which is good and bad. You can be a little bit looser, but for me, I care a lot about the feeling of the visual experience of the film a lot. And so I really tried to do that with the amazing cinematographers I worked with. That's just something I personally kind of care about, I guess.
Yeah. And it shows.
Thank you.
One of the things that I found interesting, so you sent us a preview of this whole film, and then a couple of weeks later, you sent us a new segment that had been put together to serve as a new cold open for this film. Can you talk about why that's being added and the process of coming up with, I have to rethink the way that I want to open this film?
That is such a great question, Alan, and it was a bit of a journey for me after having had amazing experience and feedback on the film. I kept coming back to the same detail, which was, it's very simple. I've sent you the press kit for the film, and it really does give you the backstory of the film, and it tells you a lot about how it was my POV, how I lived it. It was my archive, that I was telling the story of these people that I lived with and was sharing their story. And that helps when you watch the film, because then that you understand the context. But the reality is most people aren't going to be reading my press kit. And it became clear that that piece of information and my POV needed to be, I think, explained a little bit better. And this had been a version that had been put aside. The sort of a couple of sections, a little bit of the beginning of it had been cut previously by my editor, and we had sort of shelved it. And I kind of resurrected it. And I think it's really what it needs, because I realized that we were missing a little bit of that personal element. And that is what I think makes it interesting for audiences in general. I think if you're a fan of this music and you knew that scene, it's very easy to enter right in. You kind of scooch right into it. But if you're not as familiar, I think it's really helpful as a viewer to understand that there's this kind of personal human connection to it. And so that's why I chose to do that. And it's a really small change, but I'm really excited about it. And the feedback has been incredible, and it's been really excellent. And I think it kind of is just this a little thing, which can happen sometimes. Sometimes you tweak things, and, that happens with any film until it's actually literally on, out on the streamer. Then I can't touch it anymore. But we just made this little tweak.
I think it's perfect because, I know you, I know what happened then, but it's like anyone else who doesn't know why you were walking around in 1990, whatever, with a handheld camera. that it's so much of your footage. And, of course, Susie Page had so many archival photos also. It's like the amount of documentation that you did at that time. It's so important to understand that that's where this is coming from. And I think there's a really funny, I believe it's like either Sammy or Siv in the beginning. It says like, why do you have that damn camera all the time? Like that was just so funny. And it's just it just explains everything so well and sets the whole thing up.
I mean, that was very real. I would go around and stick the camera in everybody's face and they would be very frustrated. And that is in fact Siv and Sammy Siegler in the beginning now, like, oh, here she is with the camera. And then there's a lot of funny moments of everybody, kind of like putting their hand up and saying, do you really have to film everything, Olivia? Do you really have to film me? Going to the ATM, is that really important to you right now?
No, but literally, like you had me putting my lipstick on. I was like, what are you like? Why? But you did. I just every time you turned around, you had your camera.
And ultimately, I brought the camera that night, to be very specific about the scene that you're talking about in the film. I brought the camera that night because her band Birdie was playing at Brownies, which was an amazing, amazing venue on Avenue A and 10th Street. For music history fans, Brownies had so many amazing shows, and Stephanie was playing a show there, and I was recording it, and I did that a lot. I would try to just, and again, I think for a younger generation that has literally a multi-speed high-tech computer in their back pocket that can record 4K video. I don't know if they appreciate what that means. We had nothing. So somebody had a video camera with them. That was a big deal. It was a big deal.
Even a camera,
Yeah.
Are we going to be getting the Birdie documentary next?
I think so. I think there's enough footage for that. But one thing I was thinking about, you started this before the pandemic. I mean, I think we had done our little interview session like in the end of 2019. And as this was going along for you making the film, and as this was going along for the band gaining momentum with Set It Right just coming out, I mean, really, the pandemic just sort of like put a kibosh on everything, really big time.
Absolutely.
I think that it's also interesting that you then went back and got even more footage for after the I don't say the pandemic's like done, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That was a big thing because if you're going to be actively following something realistically, as, the way a documentary filmmaker does, the way a journalist does, you're following a story, you have to follow every beat of the story. And the pandemic happened to us all. And I actually lost a year and a half where I had to shelve the film. And there's a moment in the film where Drew, the drummer of the band, says, oh, I remember we were hanging out and then I didn't see you for a year and a half. And that was true.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about sort of a technical thing with the film. Obviously, you have all your own footage and you have access to the band's recordings and things. But two things that have changed, I guess, since the band came in that time is music licensing has exploded, both, for musical artists and for film. How was it getting like, hey, I want to use the Nirvana video. I want to get Dave Kendall and, all this other stuff. Can you talk about like the music licensing and that? Because, obviously you can't use a Beatles song, but can you just sort of go over how you did that and sort of, you needed that to complete the picture, to tell the story, but you've got the stuff on COVID in there. You've got different clips and things. That must have been fun to wrangle as well.
I will say really quickly that as I was watching the film the first time, I was amazed at the number of songs and video clips from other bands, not just the one that we're talking about, but other bands too. And I was really curious about this subject myself.
Okay, so first of all, I had an incredible music supervisor, Lisa Brigantino, who I just have to say, I mean, there's two things you need. You need a great music supervisor and a fantastic lawyer, and I had both. And so in documentary right now, there's a kind of multiple ways in which you can handle these. There's music in the film that was 100% licensed. We went out to the bands, we explained the project, we paid them a licensing fee, and it's all done the way you would license anything. And we were really blessed by having just, artists being really supportive of the project. But it was, that's how it works. There is a law in the United States which applies to journalism called the fair use, which I think you probably know, which essentially says if you're using a very small thing for a very specific moment, specifically talking about that, it's considered fair use. So, for example, if you're saying Nirvana's song, blah, 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 and you show a picture of that and you're saying it at that time, you can do that. You can't just take it and randomly throw it into the film at different moments.
I'm glad you brought that up because I was really curious how much fair use played into this.
Yeah, fair use for sure.
Super interesting to me.
Yeah, fair use is something that we use a lot and that is very, it's used in journalism a lot, and it really does help filmmakers. And it's done in it's very controlled. I mean, you really have, you have to have. It's a very small amount. It's very specific. It has to be you're illustrating exactly what you're saying. It can't be taken out of context. So we worked with that as well as licensing. And then there's some tricks, behind the scenes, which is that I had a composer who's amazing, and he was able to score a lot of the film. And so sometimes you think you're hearing something, but you're actually hearing something else, and that's like the way your brain can get tricked. So it was all done, fairly much the way a lot of documentaries are done now. It does help that you can use, again, the way news outlets do as well, use the fair use. But again, there are situations, and a lot of it in our film has that where you have to just straight up license it. So we have a lot of clips we had to license through different archives and stuff like that.
I just want to switch gears about and sort of go into a more like of a personal thing about the band. And as you sort of, this became a major like kind of undertaking rather than just like a short clip or, a little 10-minute film or something. How did they feel about it? How were they feeling about being on, on camera and telling their story and reliving this all? And then now, how do you think that they feel now as they see the whole finished project?
I think if you ask any documentary filmmaker, they will tell you the hardest thing ever is your relationship with your subjects and the first time you show the subjects your film. It is extremely emotional. It's very intense. I think that what was the hardest for them was to relive a part of their past that had been both incredibly joyful and just a dream, and incredibly painful, and really just almost a sort of quasi PTSD after it all. And so they were balancing those layers of emotion. So it was hard for them to relive a lot of this. And they were so generous to me. And I think because we've been friends for so long, they were comfortable sharing it. But there was definitely, I could see moments where they were, kind of pulling back, and they were a little uncomfortable, and they weren't really sure. I mean, it's a big leap of faith for them. They're giving themselves to me, and they have no idea what I'm going to do with it. And I do remember the first screening. I did 2 separate screenings to show them the film for the first time, and it was very emotional. It was in a private, just like a, almost quasi, mixing studio. And it was really hard. And I think afterwards, I do think that they felt better.
Yeah.
In a way. I think they felt that it had been handled with capable hands in a way that was thoughtful and sensitive, but yet honest. Mm-hmm. And they were they were more comfortable. But even going to the film festival, 2 of the members came with me, and having to live that again, it was a lot. And at one point, one of them said, "You know what? I've seen the movie like 2 or 3 times. I'm good. Mm-hmm. I don't think I need to see this again." They sort of had enough of it. But I think they're happy that their story is out there. But I think it's also bittersweet because they have to relive that memory. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that totally does. And I mean, you had a couple private screenings, and which I went to, one of them, or maybe 2, I don't know, 2. And, just watching that was very moving. And like, I know I cried. I mean, it's like your friends' lives, basically. It was hard, but it was also pretty cool to see the story finally come out, And I think one other thing that what I mentioned earlier, having worked at the label that the record was supposed to come out on, mm-hmm. It was hard to see your friends go through that. And I don't want to put words in, David's mouth either, David Walter, who signed them, but we were both friends with the band before they got signed. And then all of a sudden they're on this major label. Then the shit hits the fan. The album was going to go unreleased. And then it's already in like the giant cog of a major label. And you can't do anything but sit back almost and watch what happens. It's just, it's kind of a helpless feeling, I guess,
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about what you're saying, Stephanie, is that I was very conscious that there's no bad guy in this story. At least I was very conscious that this is not like there was in anything in life, as we know, there's two sides to every story. Sometimes there's three sides, sometimes there's four sides. And it was important for me to highlight that there were a lot of pieces of this puzzle. There wasn't going to be like, here's the villain character,
right.
It's all this person's fault, or here's the good character and here's the hero. It was not about that. It's much more nuanced. And I think I spent a lot of time in the edit talking about that with my editor, saying, well, whose fault is it? Well, great question. Actually, nobody and everybody. So that was something I felt really strongly about, and that you're bringing up as well, is that it really was not just one person or one situation. It was a real confluence of events that led to their ultimate demise.
Yeah. And that also sadly happens to, like, I think I mentioned this even in the movie, like it happens to so many bands. It's happened to other of my friends, it's just, that's the stinking music industry sometimes.
Maybe to your question earlier about independent filmmaking, independent music making, I mean, maybe we are kind of coming full circle again, because we kind of were in the underground, then everybody pulled us out into the mainstream, and then they wanted us and didn't want us and spit us out. And now we're going back in the underground again, and we're just kind of making our stuff. So I don't know. I'm throwing it out there to you. We might be in another DIY indie cycle.
Yeah, that brings to mind something I was thinking about too when I saw this, in that I kind of saw this movie as the bookend to, I don't know if you've seen Meet Me in the Bathroom, which is the book that's turned into the documentary. I kind of saw this as the bookend of it, because you've got New York in 1990 to like the early 2000s, where it's literally just exploding. Brooklyn starting to take off, all this other stuff. And all the bands that have made it have all been talked about ad infinitum. But it's so great to have sort of an understanding of like the dog eat dog world of playing in that scene, but also the story of the bands that don't make it. And sort of like the 90s in so many ways swallowed bands whole, right? And it's good to have that kind of story. So I'm just kind of wondering too, if you thought about, I'm championing every band that didn't make it, or did you just sort of like focus it on just these guys, or did it quickly kind of come to you that like, I'm telling a story that is way more important than I probably originally thought it was?
That's a great question, Robin. It's probably a little bit of all of the above, because I think that the New Rising Suns story is representative of many stories from that era. They are a kind of textbook version of that story. So there is really an element, I think, of sharing that that represents, a lot of people's experience, the way Stephanie mentioned too. A lot of bands went through that. And it's interesting that you mentioned Meet Me in the Bathroom, because that film was my film, and that we were making the film at the same time. And I hadn't seen it. It came out a little bit before, they came out a little bit before mine. And what's interesting about that film is that actually that scene started like the day after the New Rising Suns broke up, because they were just borderline what the Strokes were. Yeah. So the Strokes the new 2001 was the first Strokes album, and they had already started playing. I remember I was seeing them. I took Drew to see them, and it's almost as if, the New Rising Suns were kind of closing out a chapter, and the Strokes were opening a new one. And I remember, I think Kevin telling me at one point there was a rehearsal studio space where they were in parallel rooms. They were rehearsing and the Strokes were rehearsing in the next room. So it's really, they did ultimately miss the next wave. They missed it. They got kind of booted before they could enter that next wave. So it's kind of a perfect companion piece. Like if I were doing a movie night, I would watch my film and that film like back to back and get your full, fill of that history.
When I see these guys, I think of bands like Material Issue, who got farther into a major record deal and then got the door slammed in them, right? Or bands that like got like a record made. Like there used to be this band called Kent that put out a bunch of records that never got made, and now they're all coming out. So
Right.
a lot of that kind of stuff.
100%.
Did you feel like now you have to sort of like champion sort of the little guy in every way, shape, or form now with the movie? You had to do it right?
So interesting. I think in many ways, yes. And when I've actually shown it to other people who have been in bands who went through that, they have their own gut check, their own reaction, like, oh my God. It's almost too close to home because they're remembering their own experience. So we are like a little, we're bringing everybody back to that period. But in terms of a larger story and what I think Endless Calls for Fame, I think is about even large in a larger way for me personally it became a bit of a love letter to New York for me, which is my hometown, and what it was like to be an artist then. And it was really, you could really do quite a bit.
Yeah.
And you could be a musician in a very real way. And as I started making the film and then following them, what was the hardest was to see how radically that has changed.
Yeah.
And how hard it is for artists and musicians to live in New York City. It is just really difficult. And that really came to the fore in the process of making the film. When I had to start to go and uncover what it was like now. And that was something I guess I knew, of course, but I was surprised by that. And and I didn't want it to be clear. I didn't want this film to be bitter about New York. Oh, it was so much better than, I think that's not constructive. It's more about what can we know about the past and learn about the past and maybe take some tips from the past to help us as artists going forward. I think that there is this really, with young people, especially, like, there is this DIY spirit and they are rolling up their sleeves and like, if I want to make something happen, I got to do it myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not waiting for somebody to just hand it over to me. I'm going to get out there. I'm going to play my shows and I'm going to hustle.
So Olivia, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to do a little bit of a pivot here. I have a question for Stephanie.
Oh.
Now, because, we're talking about this film and we're talking about the filmmaker, but you were in the film, and I'm just curious to know, like, you've been doing this show with us for maybe a year and a half now, and I've gotten to know you pretty well. And I know that you are a prepper. Anytime that we have done interviews on our show, you never go in cold. You always like to be super prepared. You do extensive homework. So I'm really curious to know how you prepared for being interviewed.
That's a great question. Because
Yeah.
Olivia will remember I literally had pages of stuff written out.
I'm sure you did.
I mean, because I was, what? My memory isn't so great, like in terms of like what happened back then. I don't remember what I, did 10 years ago. I can remember what I had for breakfast, but like not what I did 10 years ago. So 20 years ago was really stretching it. So, but I guess talking to Olivia, just sort of knowing what she wanted to talk about. I mean, there was we talked for what, an hour at least, right, Olivia? Two. Oh.
Actually, it was 2 hours. It was actually 2 hours.
2 hours.
Yeah, because she gave me a lot of time.
Yeah, so we talked a lot, and of course, there's only going to be certain little things that you're going to arc the story around, right? So, but I was trying to jog my memory, really, Alan, I guess, and just trying to, like, one thing would lead to another memory, and I just had them sort of by me as Olivia was asking me questions, just in case I kind of forgot, or there was something I really wanted to bring up, I would refer to my paper and, and then it sort of like became a little more flowy and natural because I did remember, it's so funny. You don't think about that whole thing for like 20 years, and then you go sort of delve back into it. And it's like, you remember the emotions and you remember the excitement and just how the city used to be and how the scene was and all of our friends just hanging out. And so things came back in a kind of a natural way also, I think, but that's how I prepared was notes.
Also, I just want to say one other thing, Alan, to your question. I wish I could have gotten into more of the backstory of the different characters in the film. So, Stephanie was Stephanie was in one of the earliest all-girl like rock bands, the Aquanettas, which was a very unusual thing at the time. And so each character had their own backstory that I couldn't necessarily even go into. Carl, the engineer, had done all this work with U2 and won Grammys and all these stories. And I didn't have the space to tell everybody's backstory.
Right, like Ted, right? Ted with like Fugazi and like Shudder to Think, and
so many
producing
great,
all these amazing
and
albums.
even David, who had signed who signed a million bands. So there was an element of which you almost wish you could do this sort of Scorsese director's cut and and have everybody's story.
Right. Well, when the DVD comes out, we'll get all that stuff as the bonus material. But when Stephanie had kind of told us about this thing for a while, and she's like, oh, I'm in this documentary and I don't know how much of it I'm in. I might not have, they might not have cut much of my stuff in. And then she shared the trailer with us. And this is months later. She shared the trailer with us. And like one of the first faces that I saw in the trailer was Stephanie. I was so excited. I was like, that's my friend. Stephanie. I was so
She's
thrilled.
amazing in the film, I have to say. She's great. She's great. I mean, it really is. And also, again, I think Stephanie's perspective, so the film is called Endless Calls for Fame because it's one of the New Rising Sun songs. And it just felt to me like that's the right title because it was endlessly sort of searching for fame. But I think that what I loved about Stephanie's perspective was that she had been both a musician and a label person. And I thought that was really important because, I remember, again, this goes back to, villains or not villains, is that, a lot of people who worked in the music industry were musicians themselves who worked at labels. They were like, what a great way to pay rent. I can go work at, Mercury Records or wherever. And so I thought that Stephanie's voice in terms of that context was really important as well, because she was able to see both sides, the band's perspective, as well as the labels and the business side of it. Because at the end of the day, it's a business.
Yeah. But I'll always side with the artist.
One of the things that I really enjoyed about the film was the other interviews. Stephanie's was wonderful, but the other interviews where it really got into some of the unexpected territory, I felt like. And I don't remember which band member it was. It wasn't Drew. I don't remember which one it was who talked about the financial struggles that he had after the band broke up and the deal didn't go anywhere. And I thought,
Kevin,
his struggles to hold a job and things like that, I thought was so interesting. And I'm curious to know, now that all the parties have seen the film, was there any reaction to like maybe something got said about somebody that the other one didn't know and it was a surprise? Or did David, when he heard their sort of like unhappiness about, why didn't David fight harder for us when their deal got dropped? Was any of that a revelation, I guess is what I'm trying to say, to any of the parties?
That's such a great question. I think there was definitely emotion when they saw the film, and there was going to be a level of discomfort, I'm sure. They're all adults and very respectful, and I think handled everything in a very mature way. But I imagine that there was, some moments where, some of the things that were said in the film make people a little bit uncomfortable. I have to say, they were all such a gift. They were so brutally honest with me and really shared some really, a lot of deep personal stuff, especially in terms of the struggles that happened afterwards. And that's very honest and very real. And I was so grateful for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a lot. What was really nice, though, was to see at the end, there was almost, a kind of quasi catharsis. It's as if they had to it's almost like group therapy. You had to kind of air all your stuff out, kind of like, which was in the Metallica. I don't know if you remember that film, which is a great doc from a few years ago. But, this kind of idea of airing out your laundry and kind of getting that stuff out all those years later, that there was an element of catharsis, and maybe you're actually, closing a door to that chapter. I can't speak to the depths of it all, but at least from, an initial sense that I got, I think there was a feeling of, okay, like we've done that, like let's move on. But again, I was blessed because the band members, all the New Rising Suns band members, were so open with me. to be honest.
Yeah. Another thing that really struck me was that as all this stuff is happening, they've been apart for, 20-ish years or whatever. And then the album is going to get re-released. And then there's a documentary happening, and there's a possibility for new life for this band. Two of them want to do shows. One of them does not. And nothing happens because one of them does not. And that is so frustrating. I'm sure for them, of course, but for me as a new fan, I've never heard of this band before this documentary. And now that I know them, now that I know their music, now that I say I'm a fan of this band, I would love to see them play. And I just find it so frustrating that for them, that there's not a way for them to capitalize on this potential upward movement.
I think that's a great question. I don't know. I always say you never say never. Who knows? Who knows what it'll be with once the film gets out to a wide audience. I think it's such a personal thing for them. And even just going through the exercise of having to come together for this film, I had to orchestrate the reunion scene, which you see in the film. And that was a lot for them. They had not literally set eyes at each other. You see it in the film. They hadn't seen each other since 2008. And it was intense. And there were some really sweet things that happened out of that, actually, connections that were made that then reconnected them. So a lot of things happened in the making of the film. I think a lot of people reconnected with friends from the past. And so that was really positive. In terms of creatively, whether they could see a way to make music or play music again together, I have no idea. You just have to leave it up to mystery and into the universe, and we'll see. But it has been nice to see that there are new fans of the New Rising Suns music, and especially young people I've met. It's been so great to see that they love this sound. It's very anchored in a period. It's very kind of late 90s in its sound, but there is a real interest in that sound, and there's a lot of younger bands that are now inspired by that kind of music. And that's, as we know, right? Everything comes around, as we know. I'm hearing house music all the time now. Everybody's going back to old house, like late 80s house. I don't know if you've heard that. Like, you're seeing like Nike commercials with like old house music we used to listen to in the clubs. So I love that. I'm all about it. Bring it all around. There's very few trends I wouldn't want to relive. I mean, some certain shoulder pads, maybe not so much, but
That was one of the things I wanted to sort of touch on that I loved about the film, is that it did actually play on that sort of string of nostalgia, but it wasn't heavy-handed. It was sort of genuine and nice. But everybody's interested in telling everybody's band story from 1999 to 2001 or 2002, right? It's like the new 77 to 79 for New York almost. I did kind of like the fact that the movie wasn't sugary and happy and perfectly ended. I think it made it much more realistic and much more honest, right? I mean, I think the big thing, the two things when I saw this were that I loved how brave it was, because it was trying just to get this story told in a compact amount of time with subjects that weren't always probably wanting to talk. And I'm sure that there's a lot of regret on, people that signed them and stuff. And I know the one girl that worked at Virgin was just horrible.
Hey now.
Wow.
You're fired.
I also think that it takes a lot to tell a story where it's not perfect and pretty right now, because we do like everything sort of prefabricated and boxed in these like nice packages, and it's tiered up. And I think that really is one of the assets of the film. Although I imagine it probably frustrated the shit out of you.
No, actually, Rob, I love that you asked this question, because when I started this project, what happened is that they had been asked to tour in May of 2020. So I thought I was going in to make this Hollywood ending. Here's my Hollywood ending. They're going to tour. I wasn't sure if they were going to do it, but hey, I figured this is my Hollywood ending. The band plays and the reunion show, and there's the end of my movie, right? And it totally didn't work out that way. And guess what? I think it's so much more honest and more realistic. And I love that you pointed out that, this film is bittersweet, because I think this story and the story of so many of these musicians from that era was bittersweet. And it's a more realistic, it's life, if you want saccharine, you can listen, bless the Hallmark Channel, you go, you do that. But there's a balance, you gotta this is a very different animal. And I was very aware of the fact that this was a bit of a bittersweet tale, but I felt It was more important to me to be genuine and to be honest about what the struggles were. It's too easy to be like, yay, isn't everything great? And everybody's happy and everybody's a millionaire. Yay. But that's not realistic. So I love that you asked that question, Rob, because it was definitely like, I was okay with it. I was okay that my movie is a little sad,
And bookending off of that as a jumping off point, it is amazingly hard right now from someone who writes about music, plays music on the radio, and listens to music. The one thing that still seems to happen is it still seems to be really hard to get equal female representation. So can you speak about women music documentary filmmakers and your role you played in that and why it's important? Because I think it's really important for people now to see a woman make a music film about men or just a woman make a music film, period. Can you just sort of speak to that?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. I have to say, when I was starting the process, I started to look up, I did this a funny exercise just out of curiosity. Okay, what were the like rock docs that premiered at South by Southwest Film Festival in the last, whatever many years? And when you look at specifically punk and like punk rock and rock, it is so overwhelmingly male. It's remarkable. It's actually remarkable. And except for, of course, iconic, amazing women who've made incredible rock docs. There are some amazing films that have been made by women. But if you just look at the statistics from a numerical perspective, it's fascinating to me. And I'm a complete music person. I'm a total rock chick. I have been forever. And like, why shouldn't I be able to tell all these stories too? It never even occurred to me that I shouldn't be. And it's very interesting because it was once I started the project that I realized that it is lots of dudes. And I was super psyched to not be with the dudes and to bring a different voice, and also to not have to feel like I can only make, because I'm a woman, I can only make a movie about a female rock band. It's like, no, I can make about anything I want. It's like whatever music I'm into or whatever story I want to tell. And so, it was I became more aware of that as I got deeper into the process. And especially when it came to like film festival research and looking at like that aspect of it. And even when you're looking and researching like films that have been bought, it's a lot of dudes. Now that is changing, by the way. It is really changing. There are just so many more women filmmakers in general. I mean, women DPs, we're trying. We're still a smaller amount, but it's definitely moving in a more positive direction. I mean, if you think that, a great film that had its anniversary 20 years ago is Dig, which is, in very much another, I would put Dig on my movie night too with the other two, this our movie. But that was made 20 years ago. And she was, I mean, she's amazing. She's like, so there's definitely, I think it's evolving, and I met some amazing women filmmakers in the journey, but especially punk and hardcore, forget it. It's all dudes so far.
I like how your editor is Maria Torres. Is that right? Maria Torres. I mean, like, I think that's really cool. It's like you guys were sort of like this team of, two amazing women.
I realized it was funny. And Leanne, actually, who was also our post-producer, and like there were so many women on the project. We didn't consciously say like, hey, it's the women power group, but we definitely were definitely excited that it was, I didn't consciously seek it out. I mean, I ended up meeting Gabby, Maria Gabriela Torres. She goes by Gabby. I met Gabby through a friend of a friend.
Gabby, yeah.
And, it was just synergistic, the two of us. It was just, and it was just the fact that she was one and then the other was one. And there was just all these women. We were suddenly with all these women on these, we realized we were making this movie with all these women. It was great. It was awesome. It was just, it's a nice counterbalance. And I think, again, in general, the positive thing is there's just infinitely more diversity across the board in this space. And it's only getting better, I hope. I mean, again, we still don't have enough women directors out there, but I know it's, we're seeing it. I mean, look, hey, Barbie, I mean, we're moving somewhere, right?
Completely non sequitur, but you and I are both DJs now. How do you fill a room when you're DJing? And did that mindset of being a DJ and have to fill a space with something, whether it's visual or, this is all very esoteric and weird, so forgive me, but that concept of having to fill a space either sonically or visually, and having done that as a DJ, did that affect you to tell your story as a filmmaker?
100%. I think as a DJ, it's a very personal relationship. And you know that when you're DJing in a room, you have a very real sense with the other human beings that are there, especially when you're at a club and they're dancing and there's an energy there. You are living that with them. You're feeling their, it's really important to understand what the feedback is from them and to get a sense of how to keep things moving ahead. And I think it's absolutely informed me in my filmmaking in terms of even the way in which I talked to my subjects. I'm very aware of how I was going to get them to get to a certain place. And also musically, I'm very obviously sound driven, and I'm aware of pacing, and I'm aware of when something doesn't make sense to go after something else. And I think, the way if you put a song on that's going to clear the room, or is it going to get everybody on the dance floor? You know it immediately, because you can see by the way people's energy is. And it's the same thing. I know when I'm sitting down to do an interview, how am I going to get them here? If I say that, I lost them. I can't do that. But if I go this way and I bring them in that way, then I can get an answer that's more interesting. So yeah, I think that being a DJ and having a kind of that sort of pace and understanding that rhythm, and then understanding the dynamic between you and your audience definitely informed it. And I don't know if you think of this, Rob, when you DJ, but I find it to be such an emotional process. I feel like I'm making friends with all these 150 strangers. I feel very connected.
Yeah, you do. If you do it on the radio, it's even weirder because you don't necessarily see them. But live and in a room, it's fantastic. It's like this weird energy. Alan and Stephanie will get it because they're both musicians. It's sort of similar, but we don't have to put in the work. We just sort of show up and make the records come together. We don't have
DJing takes work too.
Our hands don't hurt at the end of the night, though.
Well, maybe.
Yeah, there is an energy of that, and there is also the sense of reward as well, because you've done something, and I'm sure for you for this, you're like, when it's done, you're like, I friggin' did this. I made this. I put this in the world.
It is a major accomplishment, Olivia.
And in a way, instead of putting track to track to track that don't fit together sonically, you're putting interviewee with interviewee and interviewee, which don't necessarily fit together in that same way. So the process is very similar.
100%. But actually, Rob, when you're cutting a film and you're in an edit, we talk a lot about pacing, right? We talk a lot about pacing. Yep. What's the pacing? How's the pacing feel? It's the same thing when you're putting a set together. You're not going to put, I don't know. I'm trying to think of, you're not going to put a sleepy melodic song next to, something that's so upbeat. And, you've seen it. You've experienced, you've been to an event and everybody's up and there's a great song. And all of a sudden the DJ puts on something that is like totally down tempo and tired and sleepy. And everybody's like, what? And what happened? My energy just went, woo. So I think it's the same thing. It's really a parallel. Yeah. I think in any film, I always think of things, musically always. And I think in a music documentary, obviously it's the most important thing, but I think in storytelling too, it has a lot of parallels for sure. And with Endless Calls of Fame, I feel like I knew that it had to have a kind of a musical pace, so that you were watching it, but you were like, dancing in a club to it in a weird way. You were kind of moving through it. So I was conscious of that.
All right. We are going to take a very quick break and we will be right back to wrap up our show. So don't go anywhere.
All right, monkeying around. Look at the picture and tell me what you see.
I see a sitcom whose cast became a real band.
Whose creators were founding members of the New Hollywood movement.
This is obviously a bunny and a chicken.
Looks like a band who sold 75 million records.
And who should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
It's a bunny and a chicken.
4 consecutive #1 albums.
A bunny and a chicken.
2 Emmy Awards.
A bunny and a chicken.
Monkeying around.
A bunny and a chicken.
Podcast about the monkeys.
A bunny and a chicken.
All right, we're back. Olivia, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us for this discussion. This has been something I've been looking forward to for months now, and I'm so glad that it finally worked out.
To that.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so great. I love it.
Where can everyone find you on social media? And where do we think the film might be next? And how can people find it?
Yeah. So basically, there's Endless Calls for Fame movie, which is the website of the film that has information about the film and the trailer and clips, and there's a lot there, and we're going to keep updating it as we move ahead. We are on Instagram at VS73Films. We also, there's information about the band, the New Rising Suns themselves, on Arctic Rodeo Recordings, which is the label that actually released the record, and they have a lot of information and access to the actual album. For people who want to actually buy the album, they can do that there. It's also on Spotify, and we have links to all that. And then in terms of the next festival premieres and screenings and all that stuff, that's also going to be both on the Instagram and on the website as soon as we know. And we are just going to try to keep everybody posted. Kind of took a second to get things organized, and we have to, it just, we will be updating it as soon as I have more information. And hopefully, we will have it out into a larger streamer or something soon. We will, definitely let the world know. And I think, looking forward to it.
Yay.
Well, definitely wishing all the best luck for this film, because honestly, I think it's amazing. And I'm really excited for more people to see it. And I'm going to put you on the spot. Okay. If you get, when you get a festival or a screening in Atlanta, I want to do your Q&A afterward.
Oh my God, that is so sweet. That is so kind of you. That is so kind of you, and I will definitely take you up on it. I will let you know where we land next. It's super exciting. There's also international. If you want to come travel, if we get in somewhere in a cool country abroad, hey,
sweet.
We're coming.
So, yeah. Thank you all so much. It was so nice meeting you.
This has been an absolute
pleasure. Thank you so much, Olivia.
Thank you so much.
So that was Olivia Serafini, and we really enjoyed the interview with us. So Stephanie, to wrap us up, tell us where folks can find more about you.
Okay, you can find me on Facebook at Stephanie Seymour Music. You can find me on Instagram at there_r_birds. And I also have a website, therearebirds.com. And I have a Bandcamp page under my name. And then, of course, you can find me on Spotify and all the streaming platforms and everything.
All right, Robbo, take it away.
You can find me on the Insta or the Gram, however the kids say it. And also on the Book of Face, just under my name. And then, deep breaths. You can find me Wednesday nights on KDHX in St. Louis from 7 to 9 with Juxtaposition. All the shows are archived for 2 weeks. So if you miss a show, you can just stream it online and do whatever you want to do around the house while you're listening to it. So that's that. Also on Mondays, it's 2 for 1 day on Mondays. I am on Louder Than War Radio from 12 to 2 Central, 1 to 3 Eastern, or 6 to 8 Greenwich time. They're out of Manchester for Louder Than War Radio and a show called Antics. We've just recorded show 58, so that's done. And then also the Face Radio in Brooklyn on Monday evenings from 5 to 7 Central and 6 to 8 Eastern with the show called The Free Design. You can hear that there as well.
All right. And my name is Alan once again, and you can find all my crazy shit at cosmiccreative.com, KOZMIC creative.com. I've got an event coming up in September, which is the Georgia Indie Book Fair. And I and a friend of mine with her company are hosting this thing, and we've had a huge response to it. It just got announced this past week, and we've had a really great response. So I'm looking forward to that, and some new books coming out and all kinds of stuff. So check that out. And for everybody else, thank you so much for joining us. Drop us a line and let us know what you thought about this interview. We will let you know when the film is available to be seen in other places, streamers or whatever. And everybody have a great week and take care and keep rocking on.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.